precursor to biotech, the Green Revolution. You're in India, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, US corporations, philanthropic organizations, with the new science of breeding technology, an emerging understanding of genetics, create high-yielding dwarf varieties. Norman Borlaug is given a Nobel Peace Prize for saving millions of people from hunger and starvation around the world, particularly in the global south. And yet you've been critical of that narrative. You've written about the violence of the Green Revolution as it relates to people, communities, and alternative agricultural systems. Why?
I didn't know anything about Norman Borlaug. I didn't even know there was something called the Green Revolution. But I do know that in 1984, the state of Punjab, where the Green Revolution had been applied, had erupted into extremism and terrorism. And that same year, by December, we had the worst industrial disaster where a pesticide plant leaked in the city of Bhopal. Now, 3,000 people died on that night of 2nd December 1984. 30,000 have died since then. In Punjab, 30,000 people died in the extremist violence. So by the end of 1984, I'm saying to myself, something's going on with agriculture that is so intimately linked to violence. Why is this happening? Why do we use pesticides? Why does Union Carbide build a pesticide plant? And they actually had an advertisement for that plant they set up in Bhopal. It was like a beaker, science, beaker pouring a red liquid over a landscape where a farmer is plowing the land with bullocks. And the slogan was, "Carbide has a hand in India's future." And you wouldn't imagine how, when that advertisement in a way actually talked about the hand they had in India's future, but in a very tragic way. I was at that point doing a major consultancy for the United Nations on conflicts over natural resources. And I knew that even in Punjab there were major conflicts over river waters, over the building of dams, over the prices of wheat and rice. So when this extremist violence burst, I said, there's a layer below that and I want to understand it. And they said, sure, go ahead and look at it. So I spent a year researching in Punjab, and half the time my trips had to be canceled because I'd booked myself on a train and I couldn't reach because the train tracks had been blown up, or I decided to go by bus and the bus before ours had been blown up, and it was really the worst form of terrorist violence you can imagine. And I did this study as I did it in a thorough kind of way, and that's when I find out, oh my gosh, there actually was attempt starting from 1952 to introduce chemicals to Indian farming. And in fact, it went even further. The British had tried to introduce chemicals to Indian farming. They'd sent Albert Howard to improve Indian agriculture, and he arrives in India, finds the soils are fertile, no pests in the field, and as he writes in his book, The Agricultural Testament, which became the inspiration of the modern organic movement worldwide. He says, I threw away my spray gun and decided to turn the pests and the peasants into my professors. And he just learned and studied. And at the end of it, wrote this book about the principles of organic farming, which have guided us. 1952, already they had started to say, let's reintroduce chemicals. But native varieties don't do well with chemicals. They have a problem of lodging. And basically, they're tall varieties because you don't just breed for grain, you also breed for straw. The straw must go back to the soil. It has to go and feed your animals. It's got to make your thatch on your hut. Straw has many uses, and that's why I so admire Matsunobu Fukuoka, the Japanese natural farmer who wrote a book called The One Straw Revolution. He didn't say the one grain revolution, it's the one straw revolution. And the reason dwarfing was done by Norman Borlaug was in order to be able to pump in more chemicals so it wouldn't lodge. The narrative, of course, has been this was about feeding the world. The reality has been it was about selling more chemicals. Subsidies were made available by the World Bank. And in the first bit, conditionalities were applied on farmers. If you didn't take these chemicals, you couldn't function. You couldn't get a credit of any kind. And at the end of it, Punjab became a land of just rice monocultures and wheat monocultures with water use so intense that the aquifers are now finished. There are wars over water. A cancer train leaves Punjab because with the pesticide use they have, cancer epidemics are very, very high. The soils are dead. The biodiversity is gone. Punjab is among the states of India that has very high rates of farmer suicides. And if you really look at it, the food basket did not increase. We grew more rice and wheat, but it was grown as a commodity. The farmers would grow it, would go into these big storehouses, rot, 1 million tons every year. And part of what that action that became extremism was about, farmers seeking justice. And as they wrote in their declarations of that time, they said if a community cannot choose what they grow, they cannot decide how they'll grow it, they cannot decide the price at which they'll sell it, this is a modern kind of slavery. Now, I'm sure every small farmer feels that way. But the whole issue was made to look as if it was about religious conflict, and it wasn't. It was about farmers' survival. Since then, of course, I've continued to do the work, and I remember debating the head of the Borlaug Institute on Borlaug's death. You know, he passed away last year. And of course, he went on about the millions of lives that have been saved, etc. I said, you know, we've done calculations. We could have grown that kind of rice and wheat with organic methods by diverting that much land to rice and wheat and putting that much water as irrigation to rice and wheat. The rice and wheat increased production can be explained through increased land and water availability, not through chemicals and miracle seeds. So the narrative, of course, has been very well developed. It's a false narrative, otherwise India wouldn't be the capital of hunger. Farmers wouldn't have taken to the gun if they were doing so well. And the Peace Prize was given to Borlaug because it was said that we'll commercialize agriculture, we'll make all these chemical inputs available, farmers will become part of a commercial setup, they will be so prosperous, they will never get angry, and they'll never take a gun. And this was an alternative to the Red Revolution of China. But in fact, Punjab became a bloody place. Yeah. And it wasn't an alternative to violence, it became a source of violence.